Hi, I'm Alan Huot, President of Wildlife Control Supplies and the owner of the Collarum Predator Restraint. The Collarum is a safe, humane, canine-specific device unlike any other on the market today. The Collarum is designed to live capture canines by throwing a cable loop over their head and around their neck. The end of the capture loop is anchored in the ground and the canine is held like a dog on a leash. It is unique in several ways. First, the Collarum was designed to be 100% canine specific. The trigger requires a pull action rather than the push mechanism normally employed by traps. The effectiveness of this action for canines has been proven through the years by the M44 cyanide gun, which uses a similar trigger principle. Other animals sometimes spring the Collarum, but we've never caught anything but coyotes, dogs, and fox. Second, the Collarum is more humane than existing traps. In testing conducted by the Denver National Wildlife Research Center in 1999, 70% of the coyotes caught showed no significant injuries under international standards. The most common injury was to the teeth in approximately 1 of every 5 animals. While the live capture aspect is important, we have also developed a lethal cable for situations where the operator is certain that the captive animal will be destroyed. This cable will rapidly and humanely dispatch the animal. Third, this trap is much safer to utilize in areas where people, pets, and other domestic animals may come in contact with it. An unknowing human springing the Collarum is at little risk. Animals other than canines are very unlikely to be caught by this device, even if they spring it, and captured domestic dogs can be released with no harm done. The Collarum has been used to catch coyotes in the backyards and gardens of urban residents, at a city landfill to catch feral dogs, and among livestock to catch coyotes and fox. Recent field tests show an 80 to 90% capture rate. This is what the Collarum looks like. In a minute, I'll take you to some footage of canines that were caught in the wild and also some sample field sets so you can see what this thing looks like in actual use. First, I'd like to talk about a few features that distinguish the Collarum from any other device. These are the major components of the Collarum. You have the throw mechanism with the cable support arms and the trigger. This is where the animal bites and pulls. And the capture cable, attached with 2 clips to the side of the cable support arms. Next, I'd like to show you the setting of the Collarum as far as location, bedding, and some tips and tactics regarding its usage. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about safety. As you can see, I'm wearing leather gloves. I wear gloves when I'm setting the Collarum as well as bedding it. Also, safety goggles. I happen to wear prescription glasses, but you'll want to wear goggles at a minimum when handling the Collarum. If it fires while you're handling it, throws debris, you want to have some goggles on. Also, long sleeve shirt. As you can see, I've got a long sleeve shirt on. Again, as you're handling it or as you're bedding the Collarum and it fires and throws debris, it's just an added safety precaution. The throw mechanism arrives assembled except for the cable support arms, which are mounted on the throw lever on the inside, as shown here. Because of varying uses and preferences, no pull cap or bite piece is installed when you first receive your Collarum. You'll have to install that yourself, although they are included. Please consult your parts list and assembly instructions for more information or visit the website at www.collarum.com. The next step is to insert the cable cinch spring into the base plate of the Collarum. First, place the end of the spring with the coil spring into the hole on the opposite side of the base plate on the end of the Collarum. A small protrusion comes out on one side of the cinch spring, which is placed through that hole. And by rotating and maneuvering the cinch spring, it's hooked in place on the opposing side of the Collarum. Please note that the cinch spring hook is pointed in the same direction as the trigger. Once it is mounted, the cinch spring sits lightly in place and is held in the base of the Collarum. Before cocking the trap, you should check the trigger tension. This is the trigger of the Collarum right here. By loosening or tightening the trigger bolt, which is on the underside of the base plate, it creates friction with those nylon spacers on the trigger and requires a lighter or heavier pull to activate the trap. The Collarum arrives with very slight or no tension on the trigger. This makes the trap fairly hair-triggered. Adding very light tension will prevent trigger creep and possible misfires. Higher tension produces a trap that excludes smaller canines or smaller animals. Keep in mind that ground conditions could make the trigger harder to pull. You know, wet ground or freezing ground, once the trap is buried, could make it more difficult for the animal to pull. So generally, I'd say little or no tension on the trigger is all that's needed. Before engaging the cinch spring, we need to cock the throw mechanism of the Collarum. I like to use a flat spot. It could be the tailgate of my truck, it could be a flat rock, it could be a cutting board, or a flat surface like this floor. You begin by placing the Collarum such that the trigger is pointed away from you and the throw arms are pointed towards you. I grasp the throw arm, lifting the throw arm up. These are the two coil springs that power the throw arm. And using my body weight, I cock the throw arm back. And as I approach the trigger, and the hole in the throw arm wants to go down over the dog in the trigger, the throw arm is now locked in place and is ready to go. The Collarum is powered by two sets of springs. The coil springs, which power the throw arm that I've already shown you, and the cinch spring, which, as the name implies, cinches down on the cable once the canine is captured. The cinch spring is engaged by grasping it and compressing it such that the hook passes underneath the horizontal arm and engages in the slot in the side of the throw arm. The Collarum is now fully set, with the exception of the cable that I'll show you in a moment, and can be placed in the ground. The last thing we need to do before we go out in the field and actually set the Collarum in the ground is to mount the cable to the Collarum, and I wanted to do that in here so that you get a really good view of it. This is a 3/16 galvanized aircraft cable that we're using for this. It does have a swivel on one end for anchoring it, and you'll see that when we get out in the field. It also has a stop affixed to the cable so that the loop doesn't completely close. This is a non-lethal cable for canines. And it also has a lock, obviously, right here. Now you start by I like to cross my cable, and I leave about a 3 or 4 inch tail with the anchor sticking out. And this is the section of the cable that's actually going to go under that hook in the cinch spring and ride in that groove in the throw arm. So let's go ahead and show you how that sits on the collarum. You place it down on the collarum in front of you, and again, that tail that I talked about that's going to be anchored to the ground 3 to 4 inches goes under the hook in the cinch spring and sits in the groove of the throw arm. The next thing to do is to attach the cable to each of the clips on the cable support arms so that it forms a nice circular loop. You want to make sure you have 6 to 8 inches of space in front of the trigger so that when a canine bites on this trigger, the loop makes it past their ears and you get an effective capture. The last thing you want to do is just make sure that the cable that the lock is attached to is underneath the cable that the anchor is attached to the ground with. Makes it a little easier for bedding once we get out to the field. And that's all that there is to mounting the cable to the collarum. Before I take you out to the field to show you how to set this in the ground, what I'd like to do is show you how to deactivate the collarum. If for whatever reason you need to unset it, I'd like to show you how to do that safely. The first thing we do, of course, is to remove the cable from each of the clips and under the cinch spring and remove that. Again, wearing my leather gloves, I'll pick the collarum up and basically do the operations in reverse. Deactivate the cinch spring, which is now sitting in that slot on the throw arm, grasping it firmly and pulling it back so that the hook re-engages the horizontal bar on the cinch spring. Once again, I'll place the collarum down on a flat, solid surface, and using my body weight, I'll rest my hands on each side of the trigger and place my weight on it. And then, just lifting up with my index finger, I'll disengage the trigger of the collarum and let that throw arm ride over safely. The collarum is now deactivated, safe to handle, safe to transport. As I discuss location, I'd like to show you some actual field sets so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. All of the elements for successfully placing a foothold trap apply to the collarum as well. Many books have been written and videotapes made of those, so I'm not going to reiterate them here. What I'd like to do is point out some considerations unique to this trap. I consider 4 elements in placing this device. They are backing, elevation, slope, and space. By backing, I mean using natural features or enhancing the background behind the cable and around the bait cap so you can funnel or channel the canine's approach and pull. To capture canines with the collarum, they must pull the cap from the spring side of the trap. If the pull comes from the side, where the cable is unsupported, it will simply hit them under the chin and slide off. Even very small features in an otherwise open landscape can be used, as these views show. Regardless of size, good backing is essential to the successful use of this trap. Elevation, by that I mean I prefer to set the trap 3 to 12 inches above the animal's foot level. For example, just off the side of a worn trail. This means that the bait cap is easier to investigate with the nose and mouth, and the canine is not as likely to paw at the bait cap. Elevation is nice, but it's not essential. Slope. A slight slope or side hill helps make an effective set. With the cable slightly higher than the spring end, the cable is already on its way over the head when the trap is sprung. Slope is nice, but again, it's not essential. Space. The cable requires adequate room for an unobstructed throw. Overhanging twigs, brush, stones, etc. must be removed. The cinch spring also requires several inches of unobstructed space to fire fully. The trap can be used without the cinch spring, but the capture rate is significantly decreased. If the cinch spring is not used, the cable must be anchored differently. That is to say, closer to the cable support arm on the same side the cinch spring would occupy. Space for the cable throw is essential. Space for the cinch spring is not. Some sets have been nothing more than the collarum spiked down on the ground surface and then covered with dirt to resemble a freshly dug dirt hole. In most cases, though, the collarum is bedded in a shallow hole. Well, I've selected a location here to set the collarum, and as you can see, I've already cleared away some of the ground cover just to begin bedding it. And keep in mind those factors that we talked about earlier in the video: the elevation, the space, the slope. As you can see, this particular location has quite a substantial backing. I did place this branch here. Again, and I'm going to say this a number of times throughout the video, but you want to focus that animal on the bite piece that they're going to bite on and pull. You prefer them not to come from the side or the back. You really want them coming from this direction when they bite and pull, so that the cable gets thrown over their head in the proper position and cinched down. Again, I've placed the collarum down on the ground, cleared the ground cover away, and the collarum doesn't need a real deep depression to be bedded. It needs a fairly shallow hole that you're going to create, and then a trench for the cable to sit in. The only thing that you want exposed, at least for a fox or a coyote application, is this bite piece. If you're after a feral dog in a suburban or urban situation, many times our experience has been that you just place it on the ground and stake it down, as I'll show you in a moment, and no cover is necessary. I mean, the animals in a suburban or urban situation are used to seeing pieces of metal. They don't think anything of it. With the bait that you smear on here, and we do have a specially prepared Collarum canine bait, it gets that biting and pulling response that you're looking for. You don't want them rolling on it. You don't want them pawing it. You want them biting and pulling, okay? So let's go ahead and start bedding this and anchoring it to the ground just so you can see how it's done. All of the tools that you'd use in a typical land trapping situation are applicable for the collarum. I've got here a long-handled trowel that is a great help to use when you're bedding a device such as the collarum. I've got a heavy-duty hammer with a blade on the end for cutting roots or clearing sod or whatever. Comes in handy when driving the stakes. And also I've got a sifter here that if you need to sift so that there isn't anything that is going to impact the throwing of the arms, you might want to use a sifter. And I've got an aluminum one here that I like to use. So let's go ahead and get started. I like to place the collarum down on the ground, as you see here, so you can get a sense of where am I going to put the base plate, and also an outline, give you a rough idea of the trench that you've got to cut for the cable. And what's nice about this location, if you'll notice, is that elevation that we talked about and the slope. The cable is actually higher than the base plate at this point by 2 or 3 inches. Meaning that when an animal comes to bite on this bite piece, that cable's already several inches on its way over its head. Okay, if you can find an area with an elevation like this, it's optimal. The cinch spring also has the space that it needs, that when the trap is activated to release. Another thing you want to keep in mind, that the cinch spring does need room for it to activate, okay? So I've got kind of an overall perspective on where this is going to sit. I'm going to take the Collarum away for a moment, take it off the bed, and I'm going to cut that bed that we need, that little shallow bed, and then cut a trench for the cable, okay? You want that cable in a trench. This is where the sifter comes in handy. You can always take some of that loose soil and put it in your sifter that you're going to use for covering it up. Put it off to the side. Take your Collarum back, and as you can see, I've got a depression here now for the base plate. I've got a trench cut for my cable, and I'm going to lay the Collarum right back in there. Oh, we got to cut a couple of spots here for that to lay down in there. Okay. This is the double stake swivel. It comes stock with one of the cables that you'll get with the Collarum. You know, by its name, you use 2 stakes with it in a cross-staked manner, so that when you drive them into the ground, they're going to be in a cross-staked fashion, so that the animal can't pull the stakes out. And I'll show you that in just a moment. Smooth this out a little bit. It really doesn't take a lot to bed your Collarum, okay? Make sure it's not rocky, and that bite piece is sticking up. Now, one of the things I like to use these are 60-penny nails. You can also use gutter spikes, the aluminum gutter spikes, and there's a hole on each side of the base plate. And this is really just to anchor that base plate down, so that when the animal does bite, it gets a solid pull on the bite piece. And there's a hole in the base plate specifically for the purpose of anchoring it. And they would go in there in that fashion, okay? Hopefully you can see that really well. That's the only place that you need to anchor this base plate, is right here, with 2 gutter spikes. Now I'm going to take those away just so that you can have a really good shot of the bite piece. After you've anchored it down, then you can begin to cover the device. Let me show you these stakes. Just to give you a visual. If you're going to stake it with the double stake swivel that comes stock with the coyote and the dog model, you'd want to do it in a cross-staked manner. Again, this is where the heavy hammer comes in handy, and you'd drive those stakes in so that they cross underground, okay? An animal cannot pull them up with a straight pull then. I don't think I need to drive them all the way in. This is just a demonstration of how to bed the Collarum. So I'm going to take these away, but again, these are 18-inch pieces of 1/2-inch rebar with a heavy nut welded on the end. You can get them 24 inches, 36 inches, depending on your soil conditions. If you're in real sandy soil, you'd want a longer stake. If you're in really difficult soil, like this is here in the Northeast, where it's real rocky, 18-inch, sometimes 15-inch is plenty. Okay, so I'm going to take those away just so that you can see it. Again, that's the double stake swivel right here. And you'd anchor it right off the side of the Collarum. You just want to lightly cover that cable. Again, it doesn't have to look pretty. It just has to be a light covering. Take some from the sides if you need to, smooth it out. And I might bring some of my ground cover back in, just so it's not so, it doesn't have to look perfect again. Okay, again, here's the bite piece. As you can see, that cable is well covered now. The only thing that's sticking out is the bite piece. I would then take whatever is your favorite bait. Again, we do have a Collarum Canine bait that you can smear on here, and it focuses the animal's attention on that bite piece. They're going to bite it and pull on it, and your animal's going to be captured. The Collarum is a humane, effective, canine-specific device and is the latest that technology has to offer in the marketplace today. Professionals handling canines, especially in urban or suburban situations, should consider the Collarum as a method of capture. Thank you for watching, and good luck.